When our emotional immune systems are overactive, we are quicker to label rather than seek to understand. We reward certainty and speed rather than depth and curiosity. Hi, and welcome back to Reflect Forward. I'm your host, Kerry Siggins, and I'm so glad you are here today. So, I've been sitting with this tension. There's a lot of tension around different perspectives, different belief systems, people disagreeing. And I like to believe that I am a person who values different perspectives. In fact, I know that I do. I have built my whole leadership career around asking questions, being curious, considering new ideas, being open to changing my mind. But if I am completely honest with myself, which I always try to be, when someone truly disagrees with me, I still feel this tightening in my body, a subtle defensiveness, a need to respond or correct or to move on from the conversation. And as I've been, I don't know, analyzing, judging, I don't like to judge either, but just witnessing, observing, I should say, all of the discord going on in the world and in the US specifically around polarization and hating people who think differently than us, who are different than us, who have different opinions than us. I wanted to really question this within myself. And this question created a little bit of discomfort because I asked myself, do I actually value different perspectives? Or do I only value them when they still feel safe to me, when it's not something that is so completely outside of what I think and what I believe? And I like to think that I do truly value different perspectives. But when I get that feeling that I need to protect and defend, when I need to over explain or make sure that people really understand where I'm coming from, I wanted to dig into this a little bit deeper because I don't want to be a person who only values different perspectives when it's still safe, when it's still comfortable. I want to be a person who really can challenge my thinking and sit in the discomfort of somebody saying, I completely disagree with you. And here's why. And as leaders, we have to be able to do this so that we can foster psychological safety and we can expose ourselves to different ways of thinking that can help us sharpen our own thinking. So, as I was preparing for this podcast, because I really wanted to incubate this idea, I realized that this tension that I feel, this little bit of discomfort, that sometimes that need to protect and defend, it isn't actually about disagreement. It is about my ability, my capacity, my capability to stay open when I feel challenged. And this is really the crux of the issue for all leadership. When someone disagrees with you, do you have the capacity to stay opened? When you feel challenged, can you regulate your nervous system, take a deep breath, and be open? And that's why I wanted to do this episode because this conversation is about leadership maturity. It isn't about being right, it is about your capacity to stay open when you feel challenged. And this is the best metaphor that I could come up with to help you really understand what I'm talking about. So, when you think about your immune system, a bug comes in and your immune system attacks it. It says, this is dangerous. This is foreign. This is going to make me sick. Let's have an immune response. Sometimes your immune system, when it's unhealthy, when it's overactive, can have a response and attack something that is not actually a threat. And it doesn't just reject the bug that you're being exposed to, it actually makes you sicker. The same thing happens with your emotional immune system. When your emotional immune system is healthy, it protects and adapts. But when it's overactive, it does something else. It starts attacking things that are not actually threats, and it starts rejecting the very perspectives that could expand your thinking. And I believe that many of us, probably most of us, are operating on an overactive system. And that can be really unhealthy. That is why we go into protect and defend mode. Now, let's talk about this from a social context. You can see this everywhere right now. Conversations feel so extreme. They are more reactive. They're more binary. They're more black and white. It's an either or, which is so not how reality works. There is very rarely an either or. But because we're making conversations so extreme, because we are so reactive, we have to be right and they have to be wrong. And when our emotional immune systems are overactive, we are quicker to label rather than seek to understand. We reward certainty and speed rather than depth and curiosity. And that in leadership is where we go wrong. But here's where I had to be really honest with myself as I was asking the question, do I really value other people's perspectives? And if so, why do sometimes I get defensive? Why do I want to protect and defend? Because it's easy to point and say, yeah, that's the problem. They don't want to hear other people's perspectives. They are othering. Othering is when you say, those people don't have the same belief systems. They don't have the same values of me. They are different. They are the others. They are not me. But it's much harder to ask yourself, where am I doing the same thing? And I wanted to challenge myself to say, where am I doing this in my life? Because I don't want to be a person who just points and says, oh, yeah, look at how immature they are or unevolved they are. They can't hold multiple truths in their mind at the same time. They have to judge people and hate people for other people's perspectives or shut people down because they don't agree with what they think. I don't want to be like that. And so I had to ask myself, where am I doing the same thing? Because I do believe I'm open minded, just like I'm sure that you believe you are open minded. But the question is, does your openness have conditions? And when I was really honest with myself, I had to say yes. Why? My open mindedness works when the conversation stays within the range that still feels comfortable. It works when I do not feel like my identity as a leader, as a mom, as a human is being challenged. The real test is when I strongly disagree with somebody, or when somebody strongly disagrees with me, or when I feel misunderstood, or when something threatens how I see myself. And how I started looking at my openness with conditions is I asked myself, when these things happen, do I stay open or do I close down while still looking composed? And guess what? There are moments when I shut down, when I am not listening anymore. I am waiting to respond. I am waiting to correct. I'm waiting to defend myself. I'm waiting to explain myself. When I'm waiting to bring it back to something that feels right to me. And here's the thing, that is not openness, it is control. This just happened to me recently. This is a personal example, not a leadership example, and one that I think that many of you can relate to. I have a 13-year-old son who is doing what 13-year-olds do, and that is push boundaries as they are trying to learn who they are. I think most 13-year-olds are drowning in their identity. Who am I? Who do I want to be? How do I protect myself as I am navigating learning how to be a teenager, all of the hormonal changes, all of the friend changes, all of that weird awkwardness that happens at that age? And at 13, you don't have the cognitive function, right? The brain has not developed enough to really understand when you are inappropriately pushing boundaries, when you are not owning it, when you are deflecting, blaming other people, because let's face it, we all try to protect ourselves, especially at the insecure age of 13. Well, my son was really struggling with some of this, and I got some tough feedback. And I went into mama bear mode, right? I want to protect my son, even though everything that this person said to me about my son was true. He wasn't being respectful and he was pushing boundaries way too far. And so I had to sit in the discomfort of that feedback. And I asked the wrong questions and I got emotional and I had to come back and own that. And I had to be really willing to advocate for my son while also understanding that my son has things to work on. And in these difficult conversations, I wanted to react. I wanted to correct. I wanted to explain. I wanted to justify. And it was very difficult to sit there and just listen and hear what this person had to say and go, yes, those things are true. And it still really hurts to hear it. Like, I'm going to get a little bit emotional now about it. That is such a real, visceral thing that we all go through, especially as parents, when we have to be really honest about our kids, but we don't actually really want to hear it because it hurts. It makes you feel like, oh God, am I a good parent? It's the same thing in leadership. When somebody tells you like your leadership style isn't landing, like I was told I was erratic, like it was really hard to hear that feedback because I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to explain why I was so passionate and go after all these new ideas. And I had to really just sit there and not try to correct it and not try to bring the conversation back to something that felt safe for me. I had to just be open and understand and hear that person's perspective, even though I didn't like it. And this internal reaction, this is so important. And here's the point I would like to make because we have this internal reaction. And in these moments, even though we might think we're asking ourselves, is this true? Is this differing perspective? Is this feedback? Is this discomfort true? But here's the thing, that's the wrong question. Because what you're really asking yourself is, do I feel safe? When you feel threatened, what happens? Can you stay open? Because in reality, you are safe. It's not like you have some bear that's chasing you when you have somebody who's disagreeing with you or sharing a different perspective or giving you feedback that might not land because you are safe. But your mind is going, no, 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 no. This feels really uncomfortable. I feel threatened. And for me, when I feel threatened, I want to move fast. I want to over explain. I want to interrupt. I want to dismiss, or I want to check out. Like I can feel myself just going, I don't want to get emotional. I don't want to cry. I'm pissed right now. This is not going the way that I want it. And I hold all my tension in my jaws because I'm like this. And it causes me to shut down. But here's the dangerous part for me. I can still look like I'm confident in this moment. It can look like clarity. It can even look like strong leadership. But if I'm honest, it's armor. I'm protecting myself. It's really hard to be curious in those moments when you're like, no, I have to be right. I have to disagree. I have to defend. I have to stand up for my values. I have to prove that I'm okay and those others are not okay. That is armor. And really bringing this home for leaders, I think this key distinction that we want to make here is this idea of capacity versus intelligence, because this is where I think leaders get it wrong. We equate everything with intelligence, and we equate intelligence with being open. But here's the thing, I can be smart and articulate and still completely closed off. I was certainly that way in that moment when I was working through the feedback around my son. I can hold strong convictions and still lack the capacity to be open. The real differentiator is not intelligence, it is capacity. It is your capacity to regulate yourself in the moment. It is your ability to regulate yourself in the presence of difference. It is the ability to stay in the tension instead of trying to resolve it quickly. That is maturity. It's not about being right. It's not about winning the argument. It's about staying in it, staying present, being open, truly listening, not to respond, but to understand. So now let's circle this back to our metaphor of the emotional immune system. A healthy immune system does not eliminate everything that is unfamiliar. It learns, it adapts, it gets stronger through experience. An overactive one attacks everything that feels different. And if I'm doing that in my thinking, I'm limiting my own expansion. I'm rejecting the very friction that could make me better. And when you do these things, you are too. So here is the reframe that I think is so important. Perhaps the goal is not agreement. The goal may not even be understanding everything right away. I believe the real work is building the capacity to stay open, to stay curious, to stay grounded, even when I strongly disagree or when someone strongly disagrees with me, because that is where the growth actually happens, not in comfort, but in tension. So now let's bring this back to the ownership mindset because you always have to own it. You know, I'm a huge believer in owning it. And these questions that I ask myself, they are not comfortable and they will not be comfortable for you too. I asked myself in preparing for this podcast, Where am I open in this narrow little band of perspectives that feels safe? Where have I labeled something as wrong instead of just going, this is challenging. Maybe I should be curious about it? Where am I surrounding myself with agreement and calling it alignment? And where am I exiting conversations early, even when I'm still physically there? And then the hardest one, where am I protecting who I think I am, what I believe about myself, instead of allowing myself to evolve through this openness? So now the challenge is integrating all of this information. I am practicing this real time. And the practice is simple, but it's not easy. It's slowing down my response. It's noticing when my body tightens. It's asking one more question before I make my point. And it's letting myself sit in something that feels unresolved. It's about giving myself permission to not have to win in the moment. And I learned this in this conversation about my son because I had to do all of those things. I had to pay attention because my jaw was tightening. I had to just ask more questions rather than make a point or defend. And I had to sit for hours with something that felt unresolved while I processed the conversation and I processed the emotion because I realized that this conversation was not about winning. It was about understanding. It was about shared perspectives. It was about partnership. And it was about how do I help my son navigate this in the most effective way? And here's the thing in life and in leadership, this is more than just the conversation. It is bigger than the conversation because if you cannot sit with difference, your world gets smaller. Your thinking narrows, which limits your team, which limits your leadership. So, the question that I am sitting with right now, and I invite you to do the same, is not about whether I value different perspectives. It is about whether or not I have the capacity to stay open when I am challenged. That is key. How do you stay open? How do you stay regulated? How do you hold multiple truths in your mind at the same time? How do you say thank you for that perspective and give yourself time to process and think about it so that it can expand your world, expand your thinking? That is the challenge of today. So, as we wrap up this podcast, I'd love to leave you with the key takeaways. The first one is openness is not what you say you value, it is how you respond when you are challenged. Number two, conviction without curiosity becomes rigidity, and rigidity kills leadership. Number three, emotional regulation is a leadership skill, not a personal one, but it is required in your personal life too. Number four, you are probably more closed off than you think you are when you are having conversations outside of your comfort zone. It is so hard to stay open when you dive into discomfort. And then number five, growth requires staying in that tension longer than you want to. I hope this podcast resonated with you today and challenged your thinking on how you are viewing other people's perspectives, how you view being challenged, how you are handling it when you disagree with somebody, and encourages you, inspires you to stay open, to take those deep breaths, to say, how can I be curious in this moment? How do I allow this situation to expand my thinking, to expand who I am? That is powerful stuff. And with that, I leave you for your day. If you believe somebody would benefit from this podcast on the illusion of openness, please feel free to share it with them. And if you like this podcast, go over to YouTube or to your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to it. Drop me a comment, direct message. I love hearing from you. And please write a review and rate this podcast. It helps with the algorithms, and I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Have a fantastic day. See you next week.